Hello, and welcome to the Security Industry Association Vertical Insight Symposium on Banking and Financial Security. I'm Ron Hawkins, Senior Director of Industry Relations for SIA. The Security Industry Association is the leading trade association for physical technology businesses with more than 1,600 corporate members, including manufacturers, integrators, service providers, and others. On this slide here, you'll see a few of our upcoming events. March 19th, we have the National Capital Region Security Forum in Arlington, Virginia. Our next Vertical Insights Symposium will be on March 11th. That'll focus on lodging and casinos. And of course, the last week of March, March 23rd to 27th, we have ISC West and all the events accompanying it. SIA will be at booth 8089. We encourage you to stop by. The code on the screen will get you 20% off the conference, either a single day pass or a full conference pass. So we hope to see you there. And remember to register for the many SIA events at ISC West, including the advanced membership meeting, the market leaders reception, the Rise to Service dinner, the interface, protecting data centers breakfast, protecting utilities lunch, and a couple of women in security forum events, including a happy hour and a breakfast, and even more than that, actually. But check them out at securityindustry.org/SIA-events. All right. Now, we have a full agenda today. So if you miss anything, remember that we will have a recording of the symposium on the SIA website. And remember that also that we welcome your questions and comments. Just click on the Q&A button on the screen and submit those. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of each session. Now, before we get started, I do want to make sure to thank our sponsors, HID Global and Motorola Solutions. We greatly appreciate their support. To very active members of SIA, you can learn more about these companies on their websites, hidglobal.com and motorolasolutions.com. All right, so on to today's symposium. Now, when asked why he robbed banks, the infamous 20th century criminal Willie Sutton is reported to have said, because that's where the money is. Now, though, the money is not only in vaults, but also in worldwide digital transactions, requiring banks and other financial institutions to protect not only their physical buildings, but also their online data. Today's symposium will examine how bank security has evolved and what technologies institutions are using to protect employees, customers, and assets in both the physical and cyber realms. For the first of our three sessions, I'd like to welcome Frank DiMartino and Michael Husinek from Motorola Solutions and Sean O'Reilly from Teldio. Gentlemen, I'd like to start things off by having you introduce yourselves. Michael, since you're the first one I see on the screen, we'll start with you.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So, Michael Husinek with Motorola out of Chicago. I've been with Motorola for about 7 years now. Number of different roles while I'm here. I actually started out in the CTO and strategy office working on some of our Safe City initiatives. Then moved into a team working on our integrated ecosystem. Early days for that, which was really interesting work. And then today I lead several vertical markets for enterprise video security and access control, one of which, of course, is finance and banking.
All right, thanks for that. And Sean.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for taking the time today. I'm the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Teldio. Teldio provides situation awareness tools as well as integration capabilities for physical security environments, ultimately helping you take your security team and your dispatchers from reacting to an incident to joining an incident that's already been put in motion. So really looking forward to talking about how we tie that in together. In my career, I spent about 20 years working with banking customers in different capacities, and I've learned a lot about how we can tie the worlds together, all the way from the contact center world into their physical security environment. We were a very tight partner with Motorola Solutions. We work in the field a lot with their Avtech brands as well as their Vigilon brands. So really looking forward to the discussion today.
Great, thanks, Sean. And we have one panelist who's hiding, who's not on video because of technical reasons. But Frank, can you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Hey guys, thank you so much for having us today. I am Frankie DiMartino with Motorola Solutions. I lead the banking and financial services vertical for Michael Husinek. I work with banks, credit unions, cash handling organizations to modernize their physical security posture as we move towards a cloud-enabled and AI-driven environment. Yes, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And before we go on, let me ask you, gentlemen, are you not seeing my slide, or are you still seeing it?
Seeing your desktop.
Very strange.
Some applications on it. Yeah.
Let me see why it's doing that.
There you go. That's better.
Technology. Okay. All right. All right. Now we're just seeing the headshots, right?
Yeah, correct.
That's right.
All right. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So, Frank, we'll start with you. Can you give us some idea about the challenges that banks and credit unions, financial institutions in general are facing today?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So there's like 4 specific pressures I think banks, credit unions, and financial institutions face, right? Um, Traditionally systems are just, we're built in phases, right? Organizations inherit security tech stacks that were built over time with different budgets and different teams. And, the investment is there to protect, except the coordination usually is not really connected, right? So first, we see the systems built into phases. Secondly, I would say cloud is no longer optional, right? Security's got to operate edge to cloud, right? It aligns with IT strategy. It aligns with corporate strategy. So we've got to do a better job of getting to the cloud. And I think the team alluded earlier during the introductions, I think it was you, Ron, that was saying, let's face it, risk doesn't start at the teller line anymore, right? There's parking lots, ATM vestibules, drive-throughs, call centers, the whole KYC issue, right? From signing documents to investor know, right? Everybody wants to know who your customer is, right? So there's an expanded risk surface. And I think also, right, the fourth, I would say teams are getting leaner, right? And as the teams get leaner, there's alert fatigue, right? Sensors are growing, data is growing, and it's hard just to ingest all that information at one time, right? So teams are getting leaner and there's alert fatigue. So institutions are getting ahead by focusing on workflow and not just hardware. That's what I would say.
Mike and Sean, anything to add?
I would just add that
a couple things. I know Sean wanted it. Yeah, I knew Sean would want to say something before me, so I'll add some color after you. Go for it. Go for it.
Oh, sorry about that, Michael. There might be a mild delay. So I think Frank really covered some of the key items where you kind of talk about the system is built up over time that are difficult to integrate. That leads to a reactive posture, right? That you've got to have a human tying those things together instead, as opposed to kind of having proactive action taken on those environments. So the technology is starting to exist to tie those things together and take proactive action, which is great. But there's a lot of getting there from here. And then, like Frank said, the perimeter expansion in the staffing, right? In my past, designing a lot of call center anti-fraud solutions, we would find out that people would sit on the phone all day replacing debit cards, and then they would send gangs out into the streets with cloned debit cards that would hit 5 or 6 different branches in a week. Today, you could tie that together with license plate recognition and see that the same cars keep showing up at different branches, as an example. Michael, over to you.
Yeah, just a couple other things. So very interesting. I agree with the cloud. Everyone seems to have a mandate to move to the cloud. A couple other big picture things that I'm seeing just current landscape related is AI is coming. You're hearing about generative AI, you're hearing about agentic AI, but what does that mean? How are you going to use it? That's one of the themes I hear. Compliance, always going to be important. We got to operate in a world of compliance and making sure that we're ticking those boxes. Also, how do you operationalize security data, right? So we're sitting on a mountain of gold. Like I used to do airplane analytics, and we always talked about a digital twin, right? So we're sitting on all this data that we can mine. How do we get it out? How do we get it out into our business partners' hands? That's questions that I'm hearing, just a lot. And I'd say the last one, in terms of current landscape is just the the policy to innovation lag, right? So we have all these policies and rules and regulations that really aren't going as quickly as some of the innovation, right? So how are we staying on top of that? How are we looking at what's coming around the corner? So we're ready when the policy does catch up.
Right, right. All right. So great overview of kind of the broad issues affecting the industry. When we drill down into specific sites, specific locations, whether it's a bank or an ATM vestibule, whatever, then what kind of specific issues are we looking at? The nuts and bolts, the hands-on security in those locations.
Yeah.
Well, from a hands-on perspective, like I think the easiest, the one that comes top of mind first is a whole ATM vestibule, right? And the loitering perspective, right? Once someone's there, whether they're sleeping there overnight when they shouldn't be sleeping there, or, they're tailgating a patron to the ATM machine, those behaviors increase risk, right? So we've got to be able to figure out how behavior detection, right? Flags, I don't know, prolonged presence, right? And how we automate that deterrence, so to speak. Yeah, so it sounds, to tie back into what we were just talking about, it's all about workflow, right? And it's not just video. It's how do we get that workflow out to the teams so they can be reactive,
right,
and proactive, most importantly, right? Because seconds matter.
Sean?
Yeah, so I was going to say, just to take it a level deeper, I mean, I think Frank is on point. You think about, the ATM. ATMs themselves, in many cases, already have a lot of sensors in them to protect the ATM itself, right? Light sensors, vibration sensors, and similar. In many cases, those are kind of confined to just that ATM. When there's an opportunity to link, that the ATM is being attacked to, actions on the, local camera to get the video, to lock the interior doors, to call the security team to action, or maybe even just trigger deterrence, right? The overhead flashing lights and, PAs to say the security team is on their way to try and deter someone from completing what they're up to, right? And so, I think a lot of what you see there, is kind of that theme of these great capabilities that are, confined to their island. So I'm working with a few banking customers already to kind of connect some of those ATM sensors and the APIs that their ATM environment already provide to their vestibule environment, right? So if, fire sensor goes off, the ATM gets taken offline, the door gets unlocked to let the fire department in so they don't have to use a bank card, that kind of thing. And so, of course, my life is very much tying everything together, right? So you'll probably hear that theme from me, team. But I think, broadly, you kind of see how these become really specific. How do I tie, my local perimeter together? And then how do I tie my expanded perimeter together? Michael, over to you to expand on that idea.
Michael.
Yeah, go ahead, Frank. Go ahead. You got something to say?
Yeah, let me point something out. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the perimeter, right? Because it all starts at the edge, right? But like parking lot and pattern recognition, right? You've got LPR cameras, body-worn cameras that can help you with situational awareness, right? So, single events can be meaningful now, right? So if you've got repeated vehicle patterns across several branches within a short distance from one another, right? That's intelligence, right? And how do you act upon that across, different regions, right?
Yeah, I think we hear a lot. I mean, you're right, Frank. So we hear a lot about the layered security, right? So we've got perimeter fences, right? I'm talking more data centers now. So when I think of the most interior, and I want to work it into what Ron was saying just about the physical and the digital world. So I focus a lot on the interior, at least when in my conversations, is, well, what's the most interior? So we've got the vault, obviously, right? That's interior. But to me, there's nothing more personal than the data that's flowing through the bank, whether that's transactional data, that's customer data. So a lot of conversations I'll get into around how are we actually securing the data center for banks, right? Which is about as interior as it goes. And that follows a very similar approach that Sean was mentioning, just around how we're securing the entire bank from a retail perspective, from ATMs. You have all these things that are outside the physical locations. Well, data center is no different, right? You've got a gate. Typically, you can have LPR, you can have other things out there that you're doing investigations around. Then you're getting into more of one of the things I didn't mention around the current landscape is just biometrics and what's happening with biometrics, right? So now you're seeing more biometrics being used to scan people in man traps, and you can take that all the way down to the data center cages, right? So you've got your man traps, then you've got hallways that you've got to secure, then you've got data center rooms, then you can go right down to the rack. So number one thing is always going to be just around breaches with the data centers when you're talking about cybersecurity from Motorola's perspective and how we help there, right? So let's prevent a breach. But we're also talking about the security of the data, which I can tie this back into Teldio and what they do, right, around Internet of Things. It's not only a person that we're trying to secure against. It could be just an issue in the data center room itself with things that are overheating, with moisture, with gases that we want to detect, which are indicators to thermal runaway, right? You think about a data center, you've got a big, huge campus, right? But you don't have a lot of people, right? So it's not like they're going around inspecting for moisture or overheating. So you've got to use the technology to do that. And it can't be just silo. Like, so you get an alert, right? And then what happens, right? Well, what are you going to do with that alert? Do you need to pull up video? I think that's something where we look to our partners like Teldio. They can pull in a lot of those sensors for us. And Sean, I don't know if I'm stealing your thunder here with some of these things.
No, it's good, Michael. Actually, one thing I really wanted to call on is there's kind of an interesting trend here as well, right? So, kind of tying what you're talking about back to, both the fact that, even if you're on-prem, a lot of physical security environments are now relying on your network and your data center. And if you're in the cloud, they're doing that plus your last mile, right? And so while 9 times out of 10, that's not a problem, that works really, really well, right? A lot of it is reliant on, what is happening with that local network. And so that's actually a theme that's been coming up a lot lately, right? How do I let my local team know that my security state might be degraded if my internet provider has gone down, right? Or if my IT team accidentally took out my network. And so that's something that we've been working on with a lot of customers as well. And you kind of talked about that as kind of sensors in the data center, but just to tie that right back to the security world, right? Pushing that notification to the local team, hitting backup links to send a text message to the SOC to let them know that we've detected an outage, which of course they've probably also detected because they've lost access. And this kind of ties in with something SIA talks a lot about, right? Is kind of the layered defense. And in this case, this is a little bit of maybe offense on, we don't really know why that connection went down. Hopefully it's not malicious, but when it is down, we should probably give people a heads up, right? Especially those who are involved in the security and integrity of the facility. And so kind of just really to take that idea to what I'm really hearing from real world customers today on that and ways to enhance their solution.
Yeah, I think that is one of the more interesting things in the industry today is security is not only being used for security, but also for operational purposes, for resilience to detect not only outages, but Mike, I think you were talking about, water issues, things like that. So it really becomes an enabler, not just something I have to spend money on.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a great talking point here, and I get really enthusiastic about saying this, right? Because we're past should we use AI, right? We're all past that, right? It's just how do we use AI to reduce the noise instead of creating more of it, right? That's essentially where we're at, and we should use AI to help correlate and trigger defined workflows, right? So, like for instance, you have the totems, right? Most people right now are just putting like an object within a field of view of a camera in the morning to open or close a facility. And if that totem goes down and a patrol drives by and sees it, they know to act. We've got to move past that. I mean, there's a better way.
Well, you can use it, Sean. You were talking about you can use technology to pick that up, right? The totem.
Yeah, maybe for anybody who doesn't know, so a lot of branches will have a process when they open in the morning called the safety totem. Different branches call it different things, but ultimately the first person to go into the branch, puts something in a special place, right? Usually an object. Maybe I move the stapler from the right hand to the left hand as long as it's visible from the outside. right? Then they go back and they check the branch and they make sure there's not, someone in the back who's broken in waiting to, get someone to open the vault, right? Presuming everything looks good, they go back and they move that safety totem back, to where it normally is, right? And so now everybody else who's arriving at the branch knows they can come in for the day. That is a hyper local thing in many places today. It's still practice operated. It doesn't have to be hyper local. You can use object detection with your Vigilon cameras or any camera suite you have to basically say, is that object there too long? And if it is, who needs to know about it? That's maybe not hyper local. Because that first person to the branch might be there 15 minutes before everybody else. So they might be in the back for 15 minutes before someone else knows there's a problem, right? Back to you, Michael.
Yeah, so Ron's going to kill me because I know we're pressed for time here, but I'm going to say one more thing real quick, and then we'll get on to the next question. So I think the other challenges too is just really basic brass taxes. It's like you're investing in all these security technologies, a lot of different ones. How do you get the most out of it, right? Like, how do you access something from anywhere? How do you reuse cameras? How do you use the AI? It's getting out of what you're investing. That is like the number one challenge in addition to moving to cloud that I typically hear.
Yep, that makes sense. No, don't worry. I think we're right on time here. So we've talked a lot about the current state and also about where things are going. So let's pursue that path a little bit more now. What do you see as the future of security in this sector? What are things that people can be looking at a year, or maybe even 5 years down the road?
Yeah. So it's connecting multiple disparate systems into a single operating system for business continuity, spatial awareness, and real estate, right? How are you using your people? How are you using your real estate that you have available to you, right? So yeah, doing more with less.
Mm-hmm.
It's very exciting time to be in our business. Man, I get fired up thinking about
I'll
it.
let Sean go before me. I always talk too much, I say.
I think it goes both ways, Michael. No, I mean, I think exactly what Frank said is important. And I think there's a lot of, getting there from here, right? I'm sure if you're out there as a risk management, leading risk management for your facility or sitting down and filling out your ESRM, your enterprise security risk management portfolio for your organization, you're going, yeah, that's really great, but man, I got a million deployments and some of them are running different things, right? So, there's a little bit of that hyper convergence of how do I connect the things that don't talk together, today. There's a lot of great work that we've been working on with Motorola on that topic. But I think it kind of goes further, right? It goes to, kind of moving towards, this is going to be driven in a lot of ways, I think, by AI. And make no mistake, AI is about making superhumans, right? But somewhere in there, it is also about solving the notification overload, right? And so that's going to it's going to force the issue of I've got all these systems that don't talk today, but I'm going to need to connect them to my AI suites, my AI SOCs, and similar. And how am I going to do that to enable the benefit I'm going to get out of that? To turn the humans I have into superhumans. And so there's, a really awesome path there that's growing. But watch this space because the capability is going to get really exciting, I think. Michael, over to you.
Yeah, I'll just hit on that. So I couldn't agree with that more, right? At the end of the day, we're talking about enabling workflows around investigations, around incident management, around detection, whatever that may be. I mentioned some like glass breaking, things going on in ATMs, verbal cues for alarms. So just connecting that, like we like to think of Motorola, like got a great ecosystem, it's connected, all that stuff, taking advantage of AI, but we can't do everything, right? So that's where we look to our partners like Teldio to bring in some of those other sensors for what are going to be important to banking specifically, whether that's skimming, whatever that may be, right? We know we can't do it all. Switching gears a little bit for future state. So I hit on biometrics a little bit. I hit on AI. Just that's definitely coming, how we're going to use it. The other thing is just the integration of your stakeholders, the CIO, and how do you operationalize all that data? I mentioned that briefly in the beginning, but security is important. You got to create that foundation of security just so the bank can run, right? So when you have a breach or something like that, it's gonna disrupt the regular ongoing operations of the bank and the retail side of things, which we don't want, right? But there's a mountain of data I think the challenge is how do we get it out? How do we make it accessible? How do we enrich that data with the right, is it number of door swipes? Is it how long are lines? Is it which offices are over underutilized, right? So we're starting to see that blend of physical security in the office of the CIO. And there's some tension there, right? Because we need to make sure the security systems work the way they're supposed to, but how do we push that data out? So that's another big comment.
Maybe just a quick emphasis on that point, Michael, right? I just couldn't agree with that more. Banks have always been the pioneers historically of big data, right? But of course, that was very much about the transactions, about the ledger, about all that kind of thing. Banks have always been really good at that. AI is going to make that accessible in the security space, right? All of a sudden, you're going to be able to tie that through and take actionable insights that go far beyond just security. It'll be to some degree what the regulations enable at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. Other things, just flexible solutions, right? You want to use your own cloud storage. Is it going to be hybrid? It's all this convergence of technologies, like you're saying, to enable the security workflows.
All right, cool. All right, great look ahead. All right, so unless you guys want to throw in any last words, I'm going to open up the Q&A. And as we do that, I'm going to risk sharing a screen again. Hopefully make it work this time. All right, so all right, and hopefully you guys are seeing your own information there on the screen.
Looks good.
All right, great. All right, so while we're doing the Q&A, if anybody wants to get in touch with any of our panelists from this session, there's contact information right there. All right, so first question. Let's see. This actually reminded me of something. So on a deployment years ago, sitting in our Area Defense Operations Center, always get alarmed from the sensors. And the most important thing that you had to know about this system was press F1, because F1 would stop the alarm. So I don't think we're the only ones who endured those repeated alarms or found the same or similar solution. So how do you address that alarm fatigue so that they actually mean something again?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And it's alarm fatigue a lot of times is, let's face it, and Sean and Michael come from the IoT data center, big data collection environments where now systems include Oregon Trail so responses where you have to acknowledge if ground fault happens on a fire panel, it's not just a ground fault anymore. Now you've got like 4 different actions you can access and press. So A, I will call a monitoring center. B, let's call for service, or escalate could be C and D. So now you've got like using agentic AI really to help you mitigate the alert and what is really important, right? So you're throwing a lot of information at machine learning to generate outcomes to help you do your job better. It's exciting.
Yeah, and I think we're all trying to avoid the boy who cried wolf scenario, right? Ron, you kind of called it with the how quick can you mute this thing that was happening in the past. Frank really talked about the important change that we're seeing, right? So a lot of what Teldio does with our customers is make it so the systems take an automated action that the dispatcher joins in on. Now that's of course driven by the customer's own standard operating procedures or SOPs. There's great upcoming solutions, that are in the market now, like Motorola Operator, without kind of going too far into products. They do exactly what Frank just suggested. They enable you to choose an action and kick it off, right? As opposed to, deal with the singular alarm, right? It can then correlate the multiple things that are happening so you avoid that mute button.
Yeah, and it's more than just AI detecting, right? It's AI correlating an incident for a triggered and defined workflow. That's what's happening.
That's exactly right. It's context, right? So everyone can do object detection. We can know when someone's crossing a line, whatever. it's putting it in context, which we can do if we're watching the video, right? We can piece all those things together. I think that's where AI is gonna, what'd you call it, Sean? Like a superhuman or something like that. AI is gonna really say, all right, here's what I see going across multiple cameras, multiple alarms, different sources. So it's gonna give you the right context, and then the generative AI piece will give you options. But it's all based on the security knowledge and the expertise that you're putting into the system to some degree. So I don't think you ever get away from a human. I like the superhuman assistant or whatever you want to call it.
All right. All right. Next question. How do you handle the biometric issue in states where that technology is essentially banned for certain uses?
Who wants
Well,
this?
that's a fantastic question. And from a legal standpoint, I would say, Michael, I want you to take this. I don't
Yeah,
want.
I'll take it. I'll take it. So that comes up often. You know, there's a different. It depends on each state. So I'll give you like a consultant answer. It depends, but you know, you can do facial recognition, right, or face match, where it's like a known operator. So some of it you're just going to be bound. I talked about it, compliance and regulations, and that gap that's there. In some cases, you're going to be limited, but there are different solutions which are subtly different, like Face Match, which says, hey, I know Ron's a bad actor. I uploaded that. So I'm looking specifically for Ron. That typically is fine with the laws versus just facial recognition. I didn't know Ron, but now I know who Ron is because I'm looking him up through other sources. Like there's differences in the law. You have to know the law, right? Talk to your vendors, talk to your integrators, talk to your peers about solutions they're using. Not one shoe fits all answer, unfortunately, for that round.
Right. All right. Let's try to squeeze in one more here. Are there key differences in security priorities and resource allocation between large multinational banks as compared to smaller regional or community institutions?
I'll go first here because I hear this one all the time. So yeah, we definitely have different types of customers, right? The big ones, a lot of different things and hoops we got to jump through, you know, to kind of make sure that their priorities are met. A lot of legacy systems in there. The mid-size, that's where I see cloud more. It's like, hey, there's staffing issues. I got to be able to access something from anywhere. Give me a prepackaged solution. Hey, what analytics do I really care about? We tend to see more in that space.
Yeah, just to echo that, right? I mean, large multinational, you're going to see, you know, a lot of how do I control my data? How do I own my data? But also, you know, how am I going to comply with Lending and Standards Act if I'm perhaps, you know, accidentally using protected criteria based on, you know, something an analytic is picking up that might, you know, kind of get close to protected criteria, right? I lived that in a past life. Where kind of small regional, it's very much how can I do more with less? How can I achieve, you know, the same levels of security as the big guys without blowing the budget? And so there's kind of different focus areas at the end of the day.
And different things too. I mean, we'll get into executive protection, things like that with some of the bigger ones. So just can be more unusual use cases at the same time.
Even VIP enablement too, right? You know, if the VIPs in the room, we got to take care of them.
Very true. Very true.
All right. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time. I had a few questions remaining, but I'll forward them to you guys via email. Thank you so much for appearing today, and really appreciate all the insights.
Yep. Thanks for letting us be a part of it. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Ron, and thanks everybody who attended.
All right. Take care, guys.
Cheers.
All right. I'd like to welcome our next panel, Tim and Matt, if you're out there. And while they are coming online, I'm going to put up our events slide one more time, or maybe for the first time, because I think I did it incorrectly last time. But again, yeah, just a reminder, NCRSF on March 19th. Next symposium is March 11th. It'll focus on lodging and casino security. And of course, ISC West at the end of March. And check out that code right there if you want to get a discount on the conference sessions. All right, I will stop that share. All right, Tim and Matt, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And we'll start this session off as we did the last one. I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves. Tim, please lead us off.
Hi, Ron. Thanks for having us, and thanks everyone for joining. My name is Tim Gilger. I'm Director of Business Development for North America with HID Global. and specifically, I lead the team that is responsible for the financial sector across US and Canada. So what that means for us, since there's not always a lot of access control standards yet on the retail side of banking, we're working with any sort of financial institutions, from banks to insurance companies, investment firms, anything of that nature. So we're kind of helping figure out the parts and smarts on the access control side with HID for those organizations.
Thanks, Tim. And Matt.
Yep. So my name's Matthew Sherpa. I am the director of the security technology team here at Insight Risk Management, which is a consulting firm that is best described as an outsourced security team. So I run a team that works as an outsourced security technology team for our clients at many financial spaces. That includes both construction oversight, design oversight, service oversight, as well as implementation engineering for the various systems that have to go in, coordinating with different IT teams. And so we work with a lot of different sized companies based on their specific needs to get those products in place, to make sure that they work right, and to make sure that the IT teams that are running their portions of this product understand what needs are coming from them, and to make sure that they're actually providing those services. So we have a lot of experience putting in some of these complex global systems in many difficult environments.
All right, thanks, Matt. All right, so let's start off with kind of a broad question as we did the last time around. So what trends are you currently seeing in the banking and financial sector? And Tim, I'll call on you first.
Sure, no problem. So from our perspective, there's a convergence between the physical security groups and the IT security groups, cybersecurity groups. Those groups are talking more to each other and looking at more of the same standards. So from our perspective, trying to get end-to-end security from an access control perspective is the overarching theme. So as people are looking at all the way from the software to the controller out to the readers and the credentials, trying to make sure that things are as hardened and as secure as possible. The amount of types of threats are increasing, not decreasing. And while nothing is future-proof, the solutions from end to end are becoming more and more scalable. So those trends and having those things more unified, I would say is probably the biggest trend that we're seeing, without getting into specifics.
Yeah, and I can actually I can further that. We're seeing this big push. IT's interested in everything that the security technology platforms are leveraging and using. As Tim said, from a hardening standpoint, we're being asked questions about things like what firmware our devices are on, even when we come to access control, right? Making sure that we're keeping that cadence, updating it. The worst thing anyone wants to hear is, when was the last firmware update? Oh, I'm not sure. Or is that a thing we should do, right? So, we see that a lot, but we also see on the IT side a desire for using a lot of these systems, right? So being able to walk up to a printer and, print with my device or my card, right? Depending on what I'm using, whatever my access control is, being fluid across those spaces. Also understanding things like, where should I send cleaning staff? Where were people in a space? That's another item that is also a big trend that we're seeing or being asked for. And again, because we're doing implementation, I see a lot of that because we're there kind of connecting the two systems in many cases. Yeah.
Right. So, all right. So, I started at SIA back in 2008, and one of the first words I heard after I started here was convergence. That was a big trend, and 17, 18 years later, still hearing about convergence. So, are we nearing an end state? Are we getting closer to actual converged security?
So I think from my own perspective, I think the answer is yes. I think it's more that in the time that's passed, we've gone from that being an aspiration to it being a requirement, right? Systems that are in place today that were in place before, maybe you're still striving towards it, but new systems going in, or systems that are being upgraded, there's no longer an optionality to that discussion. It needs to happen.
Right, and just to add to that, from a financial sector perspective, the amount of federal regulations in any country, so government regulations or even global regulations and the standards, where things that were perhaps commoditized before, on the access control piece, on the logical access piece, on the secure follow me printing, whatever the application is, those same things are becoming less of an access control commodity, and it's fallen to the identity and access management piece of things, which means that it's coming under different types of scrutiny. And so it's not just one group looking at things and doing pen testing and evaluation. It's multiple groups within an organization, across the organization, and not just even within the same building, which, Matt, that's a great example of, we want to make sure that we have the same level of security for, from the perimeter of the building to the turnstile to the elevator to log into a laptop to using the doors, et cetera, et cetera. But also when we leave that Class A building in New York or Chicago, wherever it is, and we go to the data center, or as I alluded to at the beginning, as there is more and more of an interest in a push towards secure access control standards across the retail side on the banking piece as well. That's something that looking forward, I think we'll see more of. And, Ron, to answer your question, are we reaching an endpoint for convergence? I would say I think we're reaching a new chapter in that book. I don't know that there is one clear endpoint, because I think it's kind of fluid in terms of what convergence means in this context.
Right. All right. So banking and financial sector obviously has some unique security needs, very high security needs, some of it driven by regulation, compliance demands. Are there trends that you see emerging in the overall commercial security space that are being driven by the needs of the banking sector?
I can take a stab at that from my perspective first, Matt,
Yeah.
and I'd love your thoughts as well, of
Absolutely.
course. So, certainly not limited to the financial space, but organizations looking at the reader and credential platform in general with a new level of scrutiny. I feel like the concept of, well, a card cloning situation hasn't happened to me. It's a logistical challenge to change out this communication, to change out the products, to update, to rebadge people. I feel like the industry in general is taking a really hard look at, let's make sure we're moving away from 125 kHz proximity cards, and let's make sure that we're moving to the latest and greatest of high frequency secure credentials, which could mean lots of different things, but getting to some sort of unique encryption key, regardless of who the manufacturer of the reader, credential, and access control platform is definitely a trend. And then having a similar approach for your encryption key between your card, your key fob, and the reader, having that also applied to mobile access, smartphones, watches, and potentially even utilizing secure elements of Apple and Google Wallet applications. Again, not necessarily specific to HID, but just in general in the industry. I see the financial side leading that. And on the mobile access piece, not just leading it because it's cool and it's convenient, but because it's a secure credential. So what I think is unique about our space here is that having the most secure credential and then communication from the reader to the credential, from the reader to the controller to software, having all that end to end. To me, that, at least from my perspective, that seems to be the center of the ripple effect that's impacting lots of other businesses. And we see that when a big financial organization starts to do that, their data center partners are following suit, and the commercial buildings in which they operate tend to follow suit as well. Matt?
Yeah. I think to further that, right, there's this idea there is quite a bit of compliance that needs to be adhered to, right? I think that one of the big things that the balancing act at finance firms tends to be is making sure that it's a welcoming environment, but also still keeping those areas secure, right? The problem is, how do you make something like a compliance wall feel welcoming, right? You're literally walking through an extra door to get to your space. And so there are different approaches that have been explored for that. And I think that's really one of the big conversations is, how do we use the access control to enable us, as opposed to this blocker? I have to show my credential. I have to find my card, the badge I lost. When you talk about, Tim, you mentioned the low frequency procs. I'm actually in the middle of, with several of my customers, still helping them get away from those lower technology cards, just because that's what was in place. And so it really does prove to be a big challenge, and finding a destination for them is I would say, the most important work that I end up doing. You want something that's going to be unified. You don't want to go to a different office and have to get a visitor badge. That's a security concern in itself, right?
Right.
So a lot of that does tend to come up, and that's across everyone we work with.
Right.
I would add to that just briefly, if I could, Ron, that while the conversation may be started its genesis around getting all this stuff more secure, make sure that credentials can't be cloned and having a good experience, it may come from someone in the IT cybersecurity thing side of the business that's really driving that conversation, and perhaps even funding a project like this. Really, what ends up happening is organizations start to realize that not having a secure credential platform, knowing that your card that you carry to the office every day could be cloned, it starts to impact company culture, right? So the conversations we have seem to be shifting from, upgrading our technology is something that we have to do almost to our employees and to our workforce. It's a shift in the culture that we're doing for them, right? So it really begins to uh, kind of redesign, reshape what that experience looks like for organizations across any sector, but especially in the financial space.
Right. All right. So we talked about convergence as one of the key terms, of however many years. Another one of those words that's been around for a while is frictionless or seamless, but frictionless
Yep.
access, especially. So what does that term mean today?
Yep. So I can start on this one, Tim. So I think it's important to note I've actually done a couple of different investigations into trying to deploy some different options for frictionless lights. I've looked at things like using facial recognition to remove doors in certain spaces. And the most interesting application we've explored was getting rid of that compliance wall I talked about and putting in cameras and a facial rec with some sort of a black or white list to say, hey, these people should or shouldn't be here. A lot of compliance is not that someone's jumping you when you walk through the door. It's an audit requirement. So if you can show that you've acted on that person being in there, you now have a passive system, right? The challenge I run into a lot of the times with those platforms is the privacy concerns. And I think that actually came up earlier on this conversation. Depending on where you are, it's hard to put something like that in. And that also comes with there's a fairly high cost is coming down to put those platforms in. So we've looked at different things like biometrics and facial recognition to improve that frictionlessness. I think that idea that you don't have to think about walking into the office remains the place that we're trying to go, right? And so while those other options were explored, it depends on what you're looking at, but I do see a lot of mobile credential come up. It's that same idea where I have my phone, I take it out just like I do to pay for other things, right? That's still in that space of frictionless, and I'm seeing that actually be sort of let's say, the more popular approach. But I've looked at all of these, and I think frictionless really does come down to that statement of I don't want to think about security, I just want to walk in, right? And that to me is what I see as frictionless.
Right. Tim?
Yeah, that's very well said, Matt. I mean, and in some ways, the conversation around what's a frictionless entrance into a building, frictionless access control, it's kind of a new version of the same conversation we've been having in this industry for a long time, which is where does convenience and security meet each other, right? We want it to be convenient. We want it to be easy for people. We want that to be a good experience, especially at heavy traffic ingress points, right? To those big lobbies in New York, Matt, or wherever they happen to be. But with that in mind, the conversation does change based on where in the US you are, where in Canada you are, or where in the world you are. Because there's several factors at play, right? In New York, going to financial spaces, Class A office buildings, pick any one, chances of you finding turnstiles and then controlled elevator access are extremely high, right? But you go to those organizations, same facilities in London or some other parts of the world or in Toronto, it could be different, right? So there's the physical aspect of it. And then to Matt's point, I see a combination of some sort of mobile access solution and some sort of biometric solution really driving those conversations where that frictionless access control is really needed. And then balancing out which one is the appropriate thing for our culture that we're trying to build as an organization. And it comes down to each individual company. And then where you see a lot of times, especially in the financial spaces, is how are we having those conversations if we don't own and manage our own buildings? We're having the conversations with the commercial real estate companies about making sure that we get what we both want in that scenario, other tenants in the buildings are getting what they need in that scenario, and that it is somewhat scalable. So the degrees of separation, I think, are pretty broad in terms of what platforms that you use. But we do see the mobile access trend and the biometric trend happening almost simultaneously, and sometimes even being used at the same entrance point, right? Biometrics and mobile at the same entrance point, just depending on what the experience that we're looking for is.
Right. Yeah, that security, convenience, privacy triangle is an interesting one to try to balance. Yeah, so would mobile credentials in a way kind of strike that balance? Because say, I'm using biometrics to log into my iPhone with Face ID, but then I can also use that as a credential. So I'm using biometrics, but I'm retaining the biometrics on my device. Are people more comfortable with that approach?
I'll take a step at that first, Matt.
Yeah.
I think it depends. It comes down to the individual organization, not just what they like or don't like, but how their internal company policies are written, right? So for all of us that are working together on these projects, these are great conversations to have. Is like, let's understand what the current policies are around biometrics, around physical badges, around mobile access, and then create something that can either meet within those policies or perhaps start the conversations the policies also need to evolve as our systems are evolving. So from a mobile access perspective, some organizations want ultimate control where we want the mobile credential to be stored in our own company app, using SDKs, partnering with organizations, having an app built for us. And we want people to, use some sort of mobile device management, SSO to log in, maybe biometrically authenticate with the app itself, even hit a button to make it talk to the host or to the reader. And then the flip side of that, people want not their employees not to have to do anything, right? So using a wallet-based experience where it's kind of an express, where you're not even having to biometrically authenticate, you literally just show the phone to the reader and it picks up on the wallet. There's a lot of organizations that love that because there's no training involved. It's fast, it's easy. But then in more secure areas, you can turn on, with most manufacturers, you can turn on kind of reader by reader that you do have to biometrically authenticate to use even the wallet application. So the good and the bad thing is there's multiple ways to build this Lego set out in terms of what the experience is and what your policies are requiring from a security standpoint around the experience.
So it sounds like it's as much about culture as it is about technology.
100%. And those things are very closely related in my view.
Yep, and that's something I've seen too on the deployment side, right? Depending on the firm you're working with, not even just, and Tim touched on a lot of how you use the credential, which is something I actually hadn't considered. So that was great, Tim. But I think also on the deployment side, a lot of what we see, I have different firms. Some of them say, you know what, you can only use a credential if you are using a firm device, and they're locking it down in that fashion. Every firm that I've seen so far has implemented some sort of a single sign-on or some sort of an off flow. I think that's something the IT teams see as a benefit, right? You're not handing out a plastic card anymore. You're issuing something that has a tied identity to it. And so making sure we're firmly authenticating that is a key part of it. But then I see other orgs that are using BYOD as well, right? They say, hey, as long as you have something mobile device management related on the phone, you can have access to it. And so it really is dependent on the culture of that organization, how tightly they want to restrict things.
Right. All right. So are there any gaps that you see out there, places where the sector has needs that the industry is not quite meeting yet, at least not to customer demands and expectations?
Yeah, I mean, on my end, I think that the big thing I keep running into, and I've heard it talked about a little bit here today too, is this idea of giving the security platforms data over to the other parts of the firm. Facilities is very interested in all of the information that we have in our security systems, but IT is as well. And we're not necessarily looking in most of our deployments to add all of those people into the security platform. So pulling that data out, most of the requests I get are to pull this information into either a data lake or a data analysis tool. So for those of you who may not be familiar with that, things like Snowflake or Datadog, right, where they're pulling this information directly from the security platform into these systems. And in most cases, finding an off-the-shelf integration for the platforms that I work in, I don't always see that. And so that's something where the customer then either has to build something to connect with the API and it'll maintain a custom integration, or they have to pay a third party to do so. And that's not something they're hugely a fan of in many cases, especially when you get to these medium-sized firms where really that's why I'm there helping them, right? They don't have a huge team in their own sake. And so having a whole engineering team manage some of these custom integrations is a bit painful. But the data itself is still extremely valuable to them. And so, Tim, I'm not sure what you're seeing on that.
Yeah, Tim, any gaps that you see out there?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest gaps that I see are, gaps that I feel like as an industry we are actively addressing. So it's not that there's no solution out there for it, but because the approaches can be so bespoke, sometimes it's a challenge, right? So basically, getting unification across multiple platforms, to sum it up very broadly, I think is the biggest challenge and gap that we have, because the access control and the video side of our software worlds, we are working with a lot of new players now that before we would only work in a very high secure environment. So working with mobile device management tools, working with the likes of Apple and Google and Samsung, et cetera, and then working with all the identity access management software pieces, getting all those things to work cohesively together on the software side, and then trickling down to the hardware side, where you've got an influx of different reader turnstile, elevator manufacturers, printer manufacturers. Those are the biggest challenges that I think the organizations are facing. And for me on the manufacturing side, and my hunch is, Matt, for you on the consulting side, knowing what organizations have and knowing where they want to go, just kind of eliminating that game of telephone to get one clear message, one clear scope of work, is kind of the biggest gap that we have. So it's not necessarily that the products aren't there. It's a more a unified understanding about how to get everything to talk to each other, so we can kind of get out of our own way here. It would be how I'd sum that up.
Yeah, and Tim, actually, I will admit that as you're talking, I realize you work in something every day. You kind of look past it, right? That is a fair statement. That most of my life is in all of my client spaces, bringing those systems together, right? I unify these platforms with them, and coming up with plans. Sometimes they take years to implement, but it is under that same vein that Tim you talked about. I guess it's one of those things where when you do it every day, sometimes you forget that that's really the main one. So I would say my statement is then secondary to Tim's, in that I hear that after I'm done working on the other items, but my work is spent doing what Tim just talked about. So very much agree.
Right. All right. So we started kind of broadly talking about current trends, where banking security is now. So we'll wrap things up by looking ahead. What direction do you see the financial space moving in terms of security, and especially in terms of credentials?
Yeah. Tim?
Go ahead, Matt. Yeah.
Okay. So candidly, I mentioned it before, right? We've explored a lot of different solutions for the finance firms that I work with. I do see a heavy use of mobile credentials, specifically mobile credential for NFC, with a focus on sort of a seamless, all the way from outside up to your floor kind of access, right? The ability for their end users to get a deployed credential via that mobile device management solution. We're all integrated with IT right now. So we've got automated levers and joiners. You're automated in bringing you in and removing you. Your credential is automated in its creation and its removal as well. So it's both secure, but also convenient, because if you're a BYOD user, you're signing in and getting your pass before your first day of work. And so now you walk in, you walk through the turnstile at the base building, you tap your phone, you go all the way upstairs. Even your printer, you just walk right up to the printer on the first day. And because it's been integrated, you just walk right up, right? That seamless, frictionless that we talk about is something we're seeing achieved with the mobile space. And while it may not be the perfect world that some people have envisioned, right? I had some bosses in the past that talked about having that facial rec option for there's no doors, right? I can't get rid of doors. but it's so seamless because everyone has a phone and everyone's used to using their phone in this fashion, right? I go to the store and I buy something, I tap my phone. I walk into the office, I tap my phone. It's the same thing. And so I think that's really where the future's going. There's a lot of spaces where I'm doing this right now. So Tim, I'm not sure if you're seeing the same on your side, but that's my perspective.
I think that's great insight, and I definitely do see that same trend industry wide, even outside of the financial world. Moving towards having mobile access as an option, and in NFC wallet driven applications is definitely the industry trend, and the financial space. At least looking from an HAD perspective, is kind of leading that charge. That being said, I get asked every day by someone, sometimes inside my own walls here at HID, are these organizations really going to just move away from plastic cards and key fobs? And the short answer is maybe. It depends on the organization. Kind of, Ron, like we were talking about before, it's the culture piece. There are some that is the goal. There's some that's not at all the goal in launching with mobile access, at least not yet, right? So what I'd say the trend is getting to a credential platform that is not bound to one specific media type, but offers the most secure experience possible, right? So getting to a unique set of encryption keys that both meet your national, federal, global standards for encryption, but then also could be used across, from key fobs to cards to mobile credentials, and across as many different access control platforms as you need it to work, right? So having something that is both open architecture yet proprietary enough in nature from an encryption standpoint to be very secure. I would say that is really what is the driving trend, especially in the financial space. I get asked, why is financial leading the way in mobile right now? They're leading the way because what they're really driving for is security and encryption.
All right. All right. So let's get into the Q&A in our last few minutes. And while we're doing that, we want to show your contact information for people who would like to reach out to you.
Good. Thank you.
Hopefully that's up on the screen now.
Yes, it is.
All right. So first question here, and this gets into something that you guys were discussing a few minutes ago, but how challenging is integration and making all the devices work together in this sector?
That's quite the question. I would say it is dependent on the client. It is sometimes very challenging. I think there's a term that I throw around a lot when I talk with my clients, technical debt. And I think really that is the determining factor when the question comes up, right? How hard is it? Well, it really depends on how well the system was built before. And that's not something that's a known quantity in most cases, right? If everybody had all of the foresight to know where we were going, then perhaps this is simple. But if you've walked into an environment where there was a different direction that this was being taken in, and now we're pivoting, that's where we see most of the challenges, right? I know Tim talked about disparate systems or disparate devices, right? If you have an environment where every office was built with, let's say, a different system or a different set of products, there's no standards that have been applied across these, then something simple like, hey, I want mobile credential becomes an extremely complicated task, because now it's not as simple as just deploying mobile credential. It's cleaning up all of the technical debt to get to the space where you can deploy mobile credential. And that's the big challenge we see in most places.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, having the hardware side, meaning readers, reader modules, biometric devices, wireless locks, turnstiles, elevators, all those things, having all those things lined up is one thing. But then also making sure that the entire tech stack works the way that you need it to, especially if you are deploying a wallet credential where you're not just talking to the mobile credential provider's cloud and your access control system, you're talking to, the tech giants, the Apples, Google, Samsungs of the world as well. And especially with large financial institutions that are maybe merging with others or through acquisition or whatever, that is a challenge. So in terms of like how challenging it is, just like encryption and security, it comes in degrees, right? But there's a lot of upfront setup to get to that smooth, frictionless culture that you want to have, regardless of if you're doing mobile or not, I would say.
Right. So new greenfield installation, not much problem, but bunch of legacy systems, higher degree of difficulty, I guess. Yeah. All right. All right. So unfortunately, we've hit our 30-minute mark. So we'll have to bid our farewell. But Tim, thank you very much for joining us. Matt, really
Thank you.
appreciate it as well. And
Thank you.
thanks a lot for the information, guys.
Thank you both. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, and talk to you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.